Earlier this year, DeepSeek shocked the world with their amazing AI models with impressive results. And since then, they've continued to develop these and make them better and open source. I decided, why not try and build an AI workflow using Kestra's brand new DeepSeek plugin to see how good these models really are. Jumping into Kestra, we can use this as the foundation for our AI workflows, especially with the brand new DeepSeek plugin that enables you to interact with these models directly from your workflows. Similar to the other AI plugins that we have on offer, you have the option to decide which model from this provider you would like to use. And then following that, you can also specify different types of messages. So what you can see here is I've got a system message and a user message, and we can actually see in the documentation under definitions, we can see that there are three different types. We've got system, assistant, and user. Now, user is what you imagine it to be. These are the prompts coming from you. These are, for example, in the flow here, I've asked, what is the capital of Germany? Return only the name. So these are the sort of questions you might be asking and wanting responses from your LLM. Now, when it comes to the system type, this is for being able to instruct the LLM how you want it to act, what you want these models to do. So you might want the model to maybe have a certain tone. You might want it to only respond in short answers or in a certain format. That's where the system type is really helpful, because you can specify that separately and it knows that is around how it interacts rather than what it's returning each time. And then you've got the assistant type, which is for when you've already asked it some questions and you've had responses from your model, but you want to be able to follow up about that. You can pass those as an assistant message, and then the model will know what the context is so it can try again. Especially useful if you're using this as multiple tasks rather than just as one. Now, if I run this model right now, what we'll see is it will produce us a number of outputs so we can then use the response it provides in later tasks, which is a useful part of building AI workflows. So we can see here that it has produced the raw output, so we can see all of the things it's done, including how many tokens it's used, which is good if you're trying to monitor costs. But then we can also see the actual response, which here is just Berlin. So it's done exactly as we asked, and we can now pass that into a message, or we can use that in a later task however we like. That's cool and all, but how can we take this a step further and build some proper AI workflows? Now, here's an example I built earlier that will utilize some of those features that Kestra provides to help you build powerful workflows, but relying on AI as the heart of the workflow. What we're going to do here is automate the process of creating tasks. We had a recent comment on our YouTube channel about wanting to see some more on task automation, and I decided to have a little play around with using natural language to list out all the things you need to get done, but using an LLM to be able to break that into multiple tasks with deadlines into your to-do list. So you can just say what you're thinking and it will then organize that nicely for you inside of your to-do list. So this workflow works by starting off by asking your LLM what it is you're trying to do. Let's say I want to go and collect a medical prescription before the pharmacy shuts, and then afterwards I need to go to the shops to get my weekly groceries. Those are two separate things, but I said them as one sentence. Now, what that will do is we can then break that into two separate tasks, and using structured output, which is something that DeepSeek supports, where you can tell it with a JSON schema, this is what I want to see in my response. We can then use that to then help us later on in the AI workflow, because now we have a JSON full of data that we can pass into our workflow rather than another string that we then have to decipher and maybe run some manipulation to get the data we need. So this just makes it a lot easier and a lot more reliable that you're going to get the same type of responses every time, regardless of what your input is. Afterwards, we're going to use a for each loop inside of Kestra. So once we've got our array of tasks, we can then loop through those and then make a post request to Todoist, which is the to-do app I'm going to use today, to be able to add that to our to-do list. And we can use the structured output to break that into title, description, and a due date, which is especially useful because some of these APIs would like the due date in a very particular format, but we can specify that in the schema. So let's have a look at the actual YAML that's making this happen. As you can see, I've got a prompt similar to the one that I already said, but again, this would work with multiple things. This is just the example of what I need to do. So I thought it's a good example to add it to my to-do list because I do need to do these things. And then under tasks, here, very similar to what we saw in our previous example, we've got a system message, which is explaining how we want the model to react. We're explaining that it's making a to-do list. We explain that it needs to turn those into a JSON format, and that there might be multiple tasks in the prompt. We've also given it the current time because when I tested this out, it was giving me due dates for a few years ago. I don't know why, so I've given it some context on what the time is now, and hopefully that should help the model understand our context. Then I have a user prompt where I'm passing it the input at the top. So it's getting just the prompt of the tasks. I don't need to explain what to do with it because the system prompt has done that, making this AI workflow just a little bit easier. So it means when I run this, I can just focus on my tasks. I could turn this into, I could add a wrapper to this. I could use one of the Kestra apps to make this a little bit cleaner and hide the logic away, where I can just type in what I'm thinking, what I need to add, and I can see it appear in Todoist a little bit later. The bit that makes this plugin really powerful is the JSON response schema property. Now, this is the structured output that we've seen across multiple AI models. And what I've done here is I've asked it to return an object full of tasks. So this will be an object with an array, and the array will be of one of many tasks. So you can see here we've got our object, which is tasks, and inside of that, it contains an array, and we can see the array has title, description, and due date. And the really nice thing is I've been able to specify that due date is a string because that's what Todoist wants, and that's actually what the Google Tasks API also wants, bear in mind. And then I've specified the format to be datetime. Now, it's worth noting that DeepSeek uses the OpenAI API standard, so you can use their documentation to help you figure out what formats are supported and which ones aren't, but you don't necessarily have to then rely on using an OpenAI model. So it gives you the option to switch between the two, but in theory, you should be able to then switch back to an OpenAI model, assuming GPT-5 maybe gets a little bit better in the future. So you can easily switch between the models. And then I've also given it a description here specifying that I want it as a timestamp in this string, and I found that was working fairly reliably. Now afterwards we can see we've got our for each loop, and I've got this big expression here that's able to get the array from tasks, and then because we're using JQ, it returns it inside its own array, so you have to then specify just to get the first item because there's only one item. So we've got an array here as the values, and it's just going to loop through each item in that array, and then we can just easily use the task run.value expression to just get each of those items. So I've basically said, give me that part of the array. I want to get just the title. Again, JQ puts it in an array, so we need to get it out an array. Same for the description and same for the due date. And I can just repeat this without it being a problem. So I think without any further ado, let's press execute and see this in action. So here I'm going to ask it that prompt of creating, well, I've got one to collect a prescription and then get groceries afterwards. And I've said I want to do that later this week. Now, if we go to outputs, you'll see under response, if we click debug outputs, we can see it's given us that JSON schema where we've got tasks, and then inside of that, we've got an array with two different items in it. So we can see we've got an object here with title, description, due date in the format that we asked. And then we can see we've got go shopping afterwards. And if you look at the timestamp, that is exactly 1 hour after get prescription. So this has worked. Now we go back to the Gantt chart. We can see that it has in fact created two different API requests to add this to our to-do list. And if I pop open here into Todoist, we can see that it has in fact added those to my to-do list exactly how I expected. So now I can see get prescription and go shopping, and they've got the due date added as well. So I can just give it natural language, and before you know it, I'm going to have all these to-dos organized, and I can click on the upcoming feature in Todoist, and I can see it all here in a nice calendar view. So I think this is a fantastic way of utilizing LLMs to be able to take a bunch of different thoughts, throw them at it, and it can organize it for you into an app of your choice. So that is a sort of taste of how you can build AI workflows using DeepSeek. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and are you going to use DeepSeek to build your AI workflows? I'm curious to learn what models you're using and what ones you find better for specifically these type of workflows.